Good everyone. I hope you guys have an amazing day. So today, what I'm going to do, I'll be talking about the sequence price rules for correct calculation. So this is just a theory session. So I don't really wanted to make a slide, so I thought I might as well teach you guys from Trailhead. So if you've been following along, right, you would have seen, right, a lot of things uh, around CPQ, like say for instance, you create a code, you add a product to the code, and the prices get calculated based on the price rules or other logic that's set in place, right? So you must be wondering what exactly triggers those things behind the scene, right? Um, so that's something I wanted to talk about. Like, if you look at it, right, say, like I said, the same example which I gave just now, like you add a product to the code, you can modify certain things, and you have an option to calculate it. So when you save it, the things behind the scene, right, does certain calculations, and then you get the desired output. Right now, we have something called a calculating field, right? So what happens is, like, for instance, you might have seen a very classic example, right? The subscription term. So if you change, say, your subscription terms from 12 months to 24 or whatever, right? It kind of triggers a calculation behind the scenes, and that kind of drive your output result. So if you go to the Salesforce, right? If you Salesforce org, you go to the object manager. You go to, say, let me take a code as an example. So if you go to code and you go to the field set, you see we have this calculating field set, right? So, and this pretty much drives your calculations behind the scene. Say, you know, like I gave you an example, right? We have the subscription terms. Similarly, you have type and opportunity type. If you wanted to add more field, you can add it here, drag and drop. Say, for instance, if you wanted to drive a calculation, if you wanted to trigger a calculation based on account CLA, you can do that, just drag and drop. So uh, this is any field which is a part of this, the fields are right, they will contribute to the calculations behind the scene. Okay, that's pretty simple, right? You must be thinking. And now, if you remember, we have done something called the price rules, right? So let me go back here. And in price rules, I've talked about. If you so, let's go to the price rules. Let me edit the price rules. Now, this one, right, calculation event, I said, okay, for now, assume that, for now, use on calculate, and we will talk about this later, right? If you remember when I spoke about it initially. So this is something I wanted to talk about. So these all determines the order of execution, the events will happen. So let me go here. So see, this is the one, right? So it says when a CPQ calculates a code, right? So when you add a product to the code, a lot of things goes behind the scene, right? Say you might have set, like for instance, in this case, I've set a work rule, sorry, price rule based on account type and the product, right? So based on that, um, uh, say industry type. So for instance, if it's a healthcare, you will get a certain price for a certain product. If it's a education sector, you will get certain price for a certain product. So in our case, we spoke about the Chromebook, right? So I wanted to sell $230. If you're a school customer, right? If your account belongs to a school, if your account belongs to say healthcare sector, you will pay say $250, whereas the actual price for the Chromebook is $400, right? So when you do that, right, when you set up a price rule based on if then, right, we have a price conditions and then price actions, right? So um, when you set up this price rule and when you add this specific product based on a specific code, right, belonging to a specific account, the price rules kicks in, right, behind the scene. Now, when the price rule kicks in, all of this events that comes in the picture. So that's exactly what I'm going to talk about. So, say the first thing is, right, when you the how it works. from the calculation happens from a very specific sequence, right? Because today's episode is all about sequence, right? Because understanding the sequence is important because you may not need on calculate your, so you want this specific price rule to be calculated before calculate happens or after calculation happens, right? So that's something I will talk about. So what happens in normal scenario, right? So when the code get calculated based on price rule, right, behind the scene, the first thing that happens, it fetches the data, right, from the product options cost, cost and other stuff. Then it will run on initialize price rules, then evaluate the formula fields, and then it runs before calculate. Then it runs on calculate. So you can pretty much add all of this, right, if you want. So, but under normal scenario, it doesn't really work that way. I mean, you can add it because obviously, that's why they're giving you multi-select option, right? But I haven't seen. I've seen very rare scenario where they use everything. Sometimes, normally, what happens they use before calculate or after calculate. So depending upon your business requirement. And one thing I just wanted to tell you, right? So um, say certain scenario, right? Certain classification or certain business requirement uh, will force you to try out different combination and permutation because sometimes you may not get it right at the first time, so you have to play around with it to see which is the best option. But in saying so, right, um, so this is exactly what it does behind the scene, right? So you can read about it. So Trailhead. So that's pretty much. I mean, from an exam point of view, you might get quizzed around the sequencing of it, which is uh, but from a practicality point of view, I would say that it's important to understand the price rule very well. Why you need to have a price rule, and what's the price condition. So what happens, right? I'll give you one classic scenario. Um, so in the price action, right, you can have multiple price actions, right? Now, if you have multiple price actions, right, so you might want to say, hey, I have three price actions, right? And I want the order of the price actions to be determined, right? This action should fire first, second action should fire later, right? And how do you define that? Right? Because obviously you can have multiple price action, right? It's like think about like a trigger, right? So you want a trigger to be fired before insert should fire first, then after insert will fire later, right? Something like that. And if you have, I'm not sure if you've used non-profit package. In non-profit, you can have multiple triggers, right? So you to now, and in that, you can actually determine which one can get fired. So using the order of execution, using the order or priority status. So similarly for a price action, right, you can pretty much determine um, um, based on the order which multiple actions on a rule are executed. So if you have two orders, so if you have two price action, if you put one this to this one and second to another one, so this one will get executed first and the second one will get executed later. So this is just a sequence you have to keep in consideration. There is an option which you can use it if you have to use it, but that being said, right, you have to understand what exactly you're trying to achieve. Okay, it's all driven by business rule, right? So this is just like I said, this is just a theory session to make you guys understand. We have certain sequence like calculation happens behind the scene, and how does it work behind the scene, right? So that's pretty much it. So that's pretty much about this price rules, right? So, uh, I mean, I would highly encourage you to go through this trailhead and read through it if you wanted to know more. Um, but in saying so, right, from exam point of view, you won't get quizzed much on this side. You probably have to know the price rules very well, the conditions, and the price actions, right, and the lookup queries, right, this one, which we did last time. So you should know this one. The next topic I'm going to talk about the code templates, and then we talk about contracts, um, and a few more other stuff. Then we pretty much done, right? I do understand, right? If you are Not a programmer. If you're not from a if you're a technical person, sorry, if you're a programmer, if you're a technical person, you might find this CPQ certification a bit boring because it's too much of functional. But in saying so, right, if you're a solution architect, it's very important for you and the guys to understand, the functionality before you even suggest the solution to solve a business problem, right? Um, so yeah, that's pretty much I wanted to talk about it. My apologies that it does not contain any hands-on in today's lecture, but I just mentioned that at the start of the episode, right? There's going to be a theory. So, uh, that being said, you guys have an amazing Sunday. Adios.